Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video for Roll Corruption. My name is Hydra and we are going to be starting our Fireside chat today, our little series about GM thoughts, feedback, self-critique. This isn't going to be organised into 5 neat bullet points. This is going to be grab a glass of wine, some biscuits, some cheese, sit back, relax, and let's have a chat together. But there is a theme. Today's theme is on running sandboxes, and specifically I'm going to be reflecting on what I can borrow and steal and take from a campaign I'm currently playing within of Vampire the Masquerade, and what I can use from that to put into my own campaign to make it much more betterer. You see, I've been thinking to myself and realising that there are definitely things I need to do as a GM to improve. Maybe I don't need to, but I would like to, because I'd like to get more betterer. And I have to say full credit to Daddy Sheepdog Do, or Sheepdogs Gaming's GMing and his setting, and the beautiful, wonderful, lovely, fantastical people that I'm currently playing with on his channels. I will leave links to all of them down below, and please, please, please go check out Sunkissed, watch the first episode where I play a Malkavian detective, and leave a comment down below so I know I've sent a few people over, which will make me feel the warm fuzzies about myself and make me the happies. Now, let's get started into the meat and the potatoes of this, talking about what I can do to be betterer. Firstly, sandbox design, sandbox creation. What is it that is necessary in a sandbox for it to work? Well, player motivation for me is key, because it's something which I fumbled upon in my own campaign. Having an area which I thought would be inherently interesting to players, and having feedback afterwards that actually, despite the fact there were 15 different plot threads all there for a few sessions for them to tinker with, there didn't really seem any reason to do anything other than just walking around with NPCs with an exclamation mark above their head going, ding, I have something I need. It's not quite good enough. Maybe it's okay for designing a video game where you're just rolling around, mashing a few buttons, getting XP, getting items, and maybe if you go into a tabletop roleplay game with that mentality, which is absolutely fine, it could work. It could work. However, definitely, I think a good place to start is by focusing on player motivations. And how do we do this? I think the backstory is the best place to start. It's so important. And definitely I've fumbled here in the past. A backstory for me, when I've previously made them, tends to be a fairly closed book, explaining why a character is the way they are. That's how I've thought about backstories for a long, long time. Occasionally there is some unresolved conflict that could lead on, but let's just go into that a little bit further. Let's take an example of, I had a sergeant. I'm currently a soldier. I was a soldier. I left a long time ago. My sergeant was executed for money laundering. After an investigation, he was beheaded in the town square. The shame it brought to me made me question authority, and ever since I've been somewhat of a dick. That's pretty much the sort of standard backstory I would be thinking of for a character. It explains who you are and why you are the way you are. And that's okay. But in a sandbox, it gives you a way to act, but it doesn't motivate behaviour. What we need to motivate behaviour is loose threads hanging around. Maybe he was executed. Maybe he was indeed. Maybe, however, you suspected that the investigation was somewhat bodged. He would never have done such a thing, but no one believed you. No one would listen. Okay, now we've got something a little bit more interesting, something that could be looked into. And this is a level of depth I've gone to before. However, I have stopped shy of where was needed. What we need is something that actively can be done, something blooming obvious. Oh, by the way, the investigator has currently set up shop within your town, and there is someone rumoured to be within the town square that keeps crying out that they have been falsely accused, and they have been set up. You're not sure who or why, but they seem to be falling for the same fate as your sergeant. An obvious breadcrumb for the player that they can look into. There is a man within the stocks that they can go and talk to, and it may lead to information. This is the level of depth you need for a sandbox. You need unresolved, check, Breadcrumbs, check. It doesn't have to be imminent. Remember, if you're going to have 4 players all with imminent breadcrumbs of someone's in town this day only, please go catch them, your first 4 scenes for your first session are going to be them talking to each one of those people and then job done. You get 1 scene for each character. It's not going to work. Some of them will need to be staggered, some of them will need to be delayed, but having things in your backstory that can be resolved and you can see a direction to move in, that's definitely something I need. Now, there's something that really helps players do this from Vampire the Masquerade, which I love, and that is having them involved with the NPC creation process in the world. I am of the view that if players contribute to the generation of the world by not just like give me a list of factions, give me a list of gangs. No, that's not enough. You can't just say, make me a tavern. It's got to be your tavern. It's got to be the one you hang out with. It's got to have an NPC in it that you know. You've got to have a relation with them. How do you know them? What have they done for you in the past? What have you done for them in the past? What are they like? That maybe can be done partially by the GM behind the scenes, but the player needs a little bit of an idea. In Vampire the Masquerade, they're known as touchstones. They sort of keep you synced in with your humanity, but I think in Warhammer Fantasy, they can simply connect you to the world around you. They could be people that you turn to for help. They could be people that want to kill you. They could be anything, but I think given that the setting will likely require players to travel, I would probably start with maybe 1 or 2 NPCs in your own town. Notable people, that is, like you are closely connected to. A parent, a blacksmith who you're best friends with and often go for drinks with. And then have a couple dotted around the neighbouring cities, towns, etc. You've got an uncle in Marienburg. You've got a sister twice removed in Altdorf. You name it, you come up with it. Have some fun with it. You could randomly roll it off of the tables in there for character creation. You could create 3 NPCs just by rolling the dice and see what comes up. How the hell did your uncle become a pit fighter? Create a story for it. It could be really interesting. But once you have this, you have players that now feel that the world is partly theirs as well, and there's going to be a little bit more of an emotional connection because they'll be invested. They help create something, so they're going to be invested in their interest. But not only that, but they also now have a visualization of how their character connects to the world around them. Now, this isn't essential. This is obviously if you want to create a narrative-focused session within Warhammer Fantasy, and a sandbox one at that, but I think it is immensely powerful that a player is able to look at the world around them and see their own place within it. Not only because they're poor and they're a thug, and they barely get scraps of food, fine, you know that you're sort of a lower class, but you also know that you like to go for drinks on market day. You normally go and a pig seller is there and you kind of have a little bit of a crush on her, and you can't quite afford a pig from her yet. This leads us very neatly onto the next point. And after a little bit of exploration of some psychology videos the last few days, being quarantined, I found myself with a plethora of time. With a lot of time, it's not a plethora, but a lot of time to kill. So I've been watching some Jordan Peterson videos mixed in with some other stuff, and I found stuff that's absolutely fascinating. You know, I don't know how we're not those deep in this stuff. But anyway, listen to me. This is really, really important. If you're not familiar with Marlowes, is it Marlowes or Marlowes Pyramid of Needs? Ooh, I think this is GM Gold. I actually do. I think this is something really important and useful to reflect on. I bring it up here on my side. It's very, very interesting. These are the levels of needs you need as a person to sort of sustain yourself and in order to sort of continue existing in a fairly stable emotional state. And as a GM, you can threaten these things. And I think this is some good stuff here. Get another glass of wine, you're going to need it. Physiological rather, is where we start. Physiological in Warhammer Fantasy, Dark Fantasy at that, is where we focus a lot of our attention. You're threatening food, you're threatening health, you're threatening starvation, you're threatening with illness, physical violence, thugs being mugged. There's lots of focus on physiological needs within this setting, and I think it's really, really good. I really, really like it for the atmosphere it can create, and it helps portray Warhammer. However, it produces some stimulus for roleplay, in that players will need money, they will need food, but that's roleplay typically between them and NPCs they need things from. When it comes to players role-playing with each other and really getting inside their characters' heads, I think we need to step it up a couple of levels. So safety, we can obviously touch on. Personal security comes under sort of being mugged, being attacked by people things you've said, things you've done, things you've not done. Someone comes after you. Absolutely. We can threaten safety needs fairly easily within a town just by being friends with the wrong people. However, love and belongings. That's the good stuff. That's where actually those belongings and NPCs that you created that they care about, not only because they created them, but they also visualize how they relate to them. Once they're threatened, the world becomes a lot more real. They become a lot more motivated to do things. Picture two scenarios. Scenario number one, you go up to a man who owns a vineyard. Unfortunately, all the grapes are dying currently. It seems to be that the water is poisoned or carrying some sort of plague. Perhaps not the most appropriate topic for this time, but we'll roll with it for now. As such, all of his crops are dying, and he will have to pack up within the next month if the issue is not resolved. He has tried pleading with his neighbour who owns the land upstream from him, asking him to investigate why the water, etc, etc, etc. Okay, how motivating is that to you as a player? He's offered you a gold crown. Fine, okay, I'll do it for a gold crown because I need money because my physiological needs are being met. Fine. Boring. Very boring. And this is what I do as a GM, and I think this is where I need to have a talk with myself. Let's now picture your uncle, who raised you when you were young. Parents, often absent and working. You spent hours and weeks on an orchard. You pay him a visit, or he sends you a letter, pleading with you that he's about to go bankrupt. Your niece, struggling for food. The two of them can barely afford scraps to eat anymore. The orchard is completely barren, and it will only be weeks before they have to pack up shop and resort to begging or surviving on the small amount of money they can get for the land, which seemingly is now worthless. All of a sudden, you threatened someone you care about. Your character has reason to get stuck in here and do whatever is necessary to remedy the situation, and I think that is a far more compelling story and creates far more depth of character and opportunities for characters to show their own depth. And I think that's where good roleplay can be found. Maybe not good roleplay, that's where great roleplay can be found. When ammunition is given to players to make things personal. Or rather, as a GM, you make things personal and then they simply portray it. Wonderful. Now we have options. What will you do to remedy this? How far will you go? If you find out that someone upstream is ditching a load of toxic rubbish into the... What toxic rubbish would exist? I don't know. Maybe they're ditching lead or whatever. There's a collapsed mine shaft and all the lead is getting in the water. I don't know. Maybe there's a squid cave on the neighbour's land that you need to investigate and they won't let you on the land, so you're going to have to do it covertly. Maybe this will be a long-term ambition. Maybe this will take weeks to do. Who knows? But now we have something far more interesting. Now, there are higher levels on this pyramid. We also have esteem and self-actualization. Now, I do think this is somewhat probably out of my depth as a GM to start playing with, but I do think esteem is important to toy with to a degree. Mainly in that there needs to be a consistent setting of where you belong in the hierarchy of the world, and that needs to be, and it's slightly easier in Warhammer Fantasy because you have a few mechanics to help maintain this, but the portrayal of that needs to be fairly consistent. You need to know your place. If you go up to a nobleman and ask for directions, they will and should probably spit on you and walk away. It doesn't have to be that, obviously, and yes, it's common assault. I think it helps to have people know that they can better themselves and that they're here and there could be there and there's up here, which is even better. I think that's important to call into question, but I think that's something that maybe Warhammer does a little bit of. But in terms of threatening that, you can maybe do it by having their reputation tarnished. You could maybe have the deeds that they did backfire somehow on them. Maybe they helped someone out and turns out that person was manipulating them the whole time. Being manipulated, definitely. That's going to damage the esteem side of things. That's going to lead to some great roleplay. You have to be cautious here, I guess, as a GM, because you could quite easily piss off the player by maybe taking away their agency, but if it was based on dice rolls and they got manipulated, hey, that's some great roleplay material right there. So there's a couple more things I want to talk on, and also when we were discussing knowing their place in the world, I think it's also to know physically where your place is. In terms of your capabilities, rather. It's physical, but let's say you are walking down a street and you see a guard accosting someone. Someone has likely stolen something and the guard is in a scuffle. I think it is important to know that that guard is something to be a bit scared of. It shouldn't be something where you think, oh, you know what? Oh, that's one of my friends he's attacking. I'll just beat up the guard and kill him and hide him in the sewers. I think there should be enemies that you are genuinely scared of. Witch hunters should not be novice, weak, easily overcome. They should be someone that takes someone out with a single blow without any effort. A single stab of a rapier through a man's eye type of, oof, okay, that's scary and dangerous. And I think that's really important for the world, to realise that there are things that are outside of your depth and that there is a level that you can integrate with. For a sandbox, I think that's useful, because if you don't have that, you give players the impression they can go anywhere and do anything, and the repercussions will just be a combat encounter tailored to their personal level. No. I like the idea of a world where it's a bit like an MMO. You've got zones where different things have different levels, and it's very obvious to you, if you are a librarian, that if you go and try and defend someone from a guard, you're going to die. Maybe it will be the fight of your life, but you're going to get at the least very hurt. I think that's a good place to be. And leading on from there, I think forcing combat is a mistake I've made as well. And this is perhaps the last thing I'll touch on. Forcing combat upon players, I initially had done because there were some expectations within the campaign to average one combat per session. And at the time I thought, well, maybe that's needed to keep things entertaining. I'm now of the view that no, that's not the style of game nor the style of GMing that I personally enjoy doing, for a few reasons. Firstly, I think it takes away player agency when you give them encounters repeatedly that they can't avoid, and I think that's rather frustrating for players to just feel like, well, I'm going to have to fight every now and again. It does a couple of things. Firstly, it encourages you to focus a little more on the mechanics of combat, which I personally think is detrimental to most D100 games. It's the joy and the curse of the game that they have so many bloody mechanics, and combat is horrendously sluggish to get through for most. It doesn't have to be, and that's up to you as a GM to create combat that's not too slowed down, let's say, and bogged down by numbers, but I think it's so important to have an option there and to make it fairly obvious that maybe violence isn't the best way to go out of this. Maybe it's an option, definitely it could be an option, but maybe there's alternatives. I think back to one of the first encounters within Warhammer Fantasy, my first campaign on Achaidh, and when I had the group walking down the docks, I had a group of thugs come up to them. They drew weapons and I said, they look like they're about to charge you. Now, what if they weren't about to charge? Because I'd given the suggestion there that you're in combat now. What if I'd instead said, you can see that they have weapons. They've not drawn them, but they stand and start to circle around you and engage you in some degree of conversation. Maybe a little bit of pushing and shoving, but they haven't drawn any weapons yet. I could have threatened that there could have been physical violence. I could have hinted with that, with the pushing and shoving and saying that they have weapons. But equally, no combat has broken out yet. They could have tried a few roles. It could have been difficult. It could have been challenging. I could have made the roles based on the roleplay. We could have had a couple of roles. We could have started with a very difficult role, and then we could have made it a bit easier depending on the roleplay choices they made. But I think by having that choice, it does something very powerful for a campaign. It makes players not feel like they have to be good at combat, because lots of these games have, especially Warhammer Fantasy, it has a huge amount of classes that aren't combat orientated. And granted, there's enough mechanics that if you get a load of advantage and gang up, even a librarian could smack someone around the head and it can be very deadly. Fine. But I think it's a bit disrespectful to the game by saying you have to fight every time. I've said it's a fight, it's a GM thing. I'm choosing your fight this time. It's against rats now. I don't think it's a bad thing to have players that are very perceptive, spot an ambush, and avoid the encounter altogether. You might, as a GM, be thinking, damn, I planned that encounter. Well, it's fine. Don't plan too much then. That's something I want to work on. Player agency, player choice, player options, player diversity. Because I honestly think when you force combat on them every single time, you force them to see themselves as a stat stick, and you're forcing them to see physical survival as paramount in terms of creating a character. Let's go back to Dark Heresy, and one of my main critiques of that. Willpower, absolutely mandatory stat for that, as was it agility or toughness? Well, one of the two. Agility for dodging bullets. Absolutely mandatory stats. Why were they mandatory? Why did I think that? Because we did a combat every session. That was the problem. That was the problem. It wasn't the stat being the problem. Yes, they're primary mechanics if you're in combat. So allow your players the choice. Allow them conversational options. Allow them to negotiate. Fine, there will be combats they can't avoid. You can't just say, oh, look, a demon. Actually, maybe a demon could try and make a deal with them. Maybe it would be obvious that the demon would probably kill them if they didn't make a deal with them. Maybe they could call into question their morality. Interesting though, far more interesting than the demon just saying roll initiative. Gives me something to think about. So guys, that's been my initial thoughts, and once again, do please check out Sunkissed, go and say hello, jump on in, leave a comment. We'll be streaming it Monday at 7 PM UK time, GMT, but again, go say hello, drop a hi, it's great, it's fun, and also check out the sessions that we do every other Saturday. Obviously the VODs are here, and always do feel free as a GM to leave your thoughts down below in the comments, because I'd like to know what you think about sandboxes, creating good experiences, and let me know what sort of topic you'd like us to cover within the next GM ramblings, because this has been a pretty good ramble, and I've got quite a few more up my sleeve. Take care of yourselves, stay safe in these rather turbulent times, and we'll talk again soon.